everything. And
Yeah, that's for
just so
sure.
we are on the same page, this will be a free form conversation. And there are things that I don't want to miss. So I want to make sure that on the first, we're going to be talking about the public persona because a lot of your work has talked about the revealing of the mask, falling, apocalypse.
Mm.
And it means a lot more than we take, that we understand, especially today. So joining me on this conversation is Michael Tsarion. I'm already getting started because it relates to our personal moments. So, Michael Tsarion, Irish person, author, researcher, learned occult researcher, one of the first persons that really taught me to look beyond the conspiracy. And he wrote 2 articles, and he's written more than 2 articles. He's written a lot of books and stuff like that. But for the person who's joining this conversation, I like for you to read the articles that I just recently wrote, and which references Michael Tsarion's The Children of Thanatos and The Average Persona. So we're going to be talking about the average persona. Michael Tsarion, what does it mean when you speak of the average persona?
Hector, thanks very much. Well, yeah, it was a take on the average person. What is even that? So, breaking it down in psychological terms. So it's, I'm glad you read them. I got some good feedback from them, in that sense. And it's great to be able to talk about it with somebody who knows what they're talking about. So thank you again. And yes, average persona, right? The word is psychological. So it's sort of, it was Carl Jung's, it means so many things actually, but just starting on a pretty basic level, it's just the roles that people play. A persona, the average, it's not even something about averageness. No, you talk about average, nobody wants to be called average, and yet who is this mysterious average that obviously also must exist? What kind of concept is that? So typology is very important in psychology. They break people down into certain types. You even have it in other fields, like say the Enneagram, where you get these 9 types. You get them in astrology, and you even get them in certain psychological disciplines, and you even get it in a sort of philosophy. And Jung broke things down in just like extrovert and introvert, always emphasizing that there's grades even between those two. It's not, there's no classical type. There is no, extreme extrovert and no extreme opposite. It's always a shade of gray. So it's the same thing with the roles. There's people, the average persona is the person who's caught in some role, but there's all sorts of grades of that. There's people who don't fit the roles that well, and they can manage them rationally, perform those roles, right? But they keep a sense of identity. Or there's other people that are so immersed in the role that they have there's never been a stepping outside of it. There's never been any higher contemplation of anything. And even if there should be, right, there'll be fear reaction. Even if something should happen out of the ordinary, like what we're seeing now in the world across the board, there'll be psychological meltdown. And since nobody ever really, certainly not outside any psychiatric framework, there's never going to be any cataloging of that. It'll be cataloging of who lost their job, or whose money in the bank is less, and whose marriage broke up, and who's kind of screaming at the kids. But there'll never be any real accounting of the psychic damage that, say, a social event like this does. And then even in the more background setting of daily life, what happens when somebody's forced outside those roles? And these roles are the roles we all play: mother, father, brother, sister. And then the article wanted to also explore that some of the reasons why people are locked down in those roles isn't really their own fault. It's also the fact that as a child, on what's known as the semiotic level, what the hell, even on the Oedipus levels, at any given point up to puberty, you may have no choice because the adults, have decided that that's it. You will only be approved of if you fulfill these roles that the parents have set for you and themselves, and they're going to enforce it. So it's a matter of oppression and enforcement at that point. So now psychology sort of comes within the ballpark of politics, because now oppression and tyranny aren't political, they're social and domestic. How many people even know that? Well, your Herbert Marcuses knew it, and they were able to fuse Freudian psychology with their own leftist morbid form of psychology. But that's how they did it, because they suddenly realized that on this psychological level, there's a dynamic set up that aids and abets the political Machiavellian, type. And this then opens up many doors.
Definitely it does, because as you know, the global reset has been engineered into the viewer you can follow the information, the data collection, and the presentations that I've showcased, and the information that this is something beyond. Previous to this conversation, we had discussed with Jordan Maxwell the symbolism that lies in the corona crisis pandemic. I like to talk with Mr. Michael Tsarion because this is much more than just the facts, the data, the series of numbers and information that gets overestimated by government. It's the human element. And so we talk about the average persona, and the recent article I talked about the customer service persona. So Michael is talking about how this collapse or the scenario of reset of the economy is actually showcasing the underlying neurosis that is behind the average persona or the market friendly customer service persona. So now, as you know, Michael, these things go way beyond just the current time in the decade. And so let's focus again to the viewer, to the understanding, these ideas, these thoughts, there's a genealogy. So we're going to be covering where does it originate, this idea to be okay, to be average, to be devoid of passion, as long as you fit into the mold of the authoritarian complex, or as you call it, the Machiavellian personality or the thug. Please take it along, Michael.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, to me, it starts at birth. That any political ramification, no matter how weird it looks, even Bolshevik communism or any manifestation, in the Northern Ireland conflict would be one that I looked at, and it's all personality type driven. And you'd think that we'd all be up to speed with this now because 1930s, you had it became chic, a little bit after a time. Freud, he set it in motion, and there were periods where this kind of thing became kind of chic, right? Both in America and also in Britain, psychology and psychological typology, for all its little flaws and everything, it became quite popular, and many filmmakers and everybody talked about it. Alfred Hitchcock, so many of his films were made along these lines, and he wasn't the only one. So you'd think by now we wouldn't even have to mention this, that this would be a given. And yet something odd has happened in which there's been this cognitive dissonance and has fallen down the memory hole, even some basic 101 stuff. And this is unacceptable, you see. So, but when you get into it, you find out that all political manifestations first start in and again, just keeping this very generic, not going in to say Wilhelm Reich yet or anything like that. Just it starts in the dynamic of the fetus in the womb, and then the afterbirth of that, and all of this. And so the mother-self conversation would be very, very important, right? With women, with mothers and daughters, you have a phenomenon I just call the dragon fight. It's just colorful language for the tension and the conflict that they have in their lives. You have the Oedipal stages, right, which affects boys and girls as well, sort of a little bit later on, starting at more at 2 and then moving up to 7. And so there's acts of tyranny involved and acts of deep oppression. And all my life, I've just been trying to unpack that in different ways, and also looking at it from different perspectives, knowing that people don't necessarily like the Freudian idea. Well, hey, you got Otto Rank. Hey, you got Melanie Klein. You've got Julia Kristeva. There's no end to the perspectives, right? You got Alice Miller. You got Carl Jung. So there's multiple ways to pick it up and put it down. But the basic thing is that we're geared for tyranny, right? We become our own tyrants very early on because of this parental, what I call adultism. And so adultism is found at the root. Once you do the real excavation, right, of all these forms of political tyranny, then you find what's really going on in the deepest, darkest part of the psyche, and how certain walls have been erected, psychic walls, between us. And who's the cement mixer is the superego. The wall is created. That's between us and our true selves. We're never rewarded for being a true self, but you're endlessly rewarded for being this role, for playing this mask. And the mothers and the fathers are the basic tyrants. They're the twin peaks, as it's often been called in surrealistic, by surrealistic directors who know all about this. And those twin peaks loom, you see, over the innocent child who doesn't know better, who looks up to them as heroic figures, and in doing so loses his own heroism. And then there are certain, as you stumble and fall psychologically, as that process takes place up to puberty, you might meet a wise grandmother or grandfather. You might meet a neighbor, right? You might meet, an uncle or an aunt, or even a school teacher, and it might just stop you crashing to the ground and smashing, yourself to pieces, so that you're just one of the average personas walking around who are hiding within that persona because that's all the stability they've got. So they're not selves; they're pseudo selves, right? They're counterfeit selves, and the dynamic starts when their will or identity was crushed, right? When I hone in on the women, it's more like I just call it the dragon fight. but it's all of these Oedipal dynamics. It's the entrance of the soul, into the solar masculine world. So if you stream up to the front, if you really, if you take this and then you move right up into the modern day headline, it's still going on, except now we're not finding anybody wise. We're looking to Trump, we're looking to leaders, right? So on the political level, also for a long, long, long time now, both domestically and politically, there is no wise people left. It's almost been a cleaning of the slate. People who speak like I do, like Jordan Peterson, maybe, although again his level is very much a window dressing type of. But we've talked about this before. Fine, fantastic. Still, those people are more lampooned and denied and rejected than they are listened to and absorbed. So yeah, so right across the board, we've lost an element that used to exist before, where somebody would bitch slap us, a wise man into sanity. You're not having that anymore because everybody's got the contagion. And then in other articles, I speak about Wilhelm Reich's take on this, a little bit different take, involving the body, involving a kind of an emotional poisoning that he calls the emotional plague, and how that factors into this. That imagine you are actually, got leprosy, or you've got, blindness, or some other heavy-duty impairment. According to him, we all do, right? It's just not leprosy or blindness or dumbness or whatever, or autism. But basically, the body is working on a very primitive autistic level because the body suffered from all of that dynamic of adultism imposed, right? That's why, a lot of people have dietary issues or bulimia or overeating. All of this is the body's, what's called the somatic response to tyranny. Then you've got the factor of the right brain, and the conflict between the hemispheres. So if you're a divided, fragmented being within, and you're taking refuge in this tiny little, square that just about keeps you in a straitjacket of normality, which is the persona, then it doesn't really matter what fiasco happens politically, and if you do have leaders, they're certainly not leaders, they're misleaders. There are people right now, like in our ambiance now, who are very, very getting a big kick out of pulling the rug, so that we are brought back to the level of, say, a medieval peon. How do you pull water from the well? Do you know how to work it? You got a bucket? Well, I got one with a hole in it. Oh, yeah, I'll do, I guess. Like three stooges running around, right? They love that fact. They love to find out that the bread van isn't coming. The dentist doesn't want to know me, right? They love all of that. To see, we have supplied you with a world and a reality, and you don't seem to like it. Okay, we'll pull it back a bit, and we'll see how baby then bangs the spoon, and gets all weird and cries out for more. And what the result of that will obviously be more conformity. Not that you need any more of it. We're wall-to-wall conformity. But of course, this will say everything went back to normal. People would sigh a little sigh of relief and say, go, good, I'm not going to rock the boat anymore. The boat's just been rocked for us. Sure, and everything fell apart. So I'm not going to rock it again. Hail the masters. Maybe that's it. Or maybe it's going to be a permanent, or not a permanent, but a very long period of feudal, situation in which, or it could be something even. I've even looked at the silver lining. We do have an enemy. It is called communism, and maybe it's the takedown time, and then a little bit of sacrifice on our side, is warranted on that level. So I've looked at this thing from many, many perspectives. But the psychological perspective is the truest of all because it's age old. Whatever equations of psychology you're using, probably they're going to be true at some point, at some level, right? And the one about extrovert masses and cities and urban environments today, needing their shopping and their manicuring and whatever else, and just the buzz, yeah, that's a psychological equation. And so people being locked up in their homes, not good. They're going to start losing the thread of sanity. And I'm not saying that jokingly. I mean it absolutely. And by now, I would think, I'm amazed it actually hasn't already started, because people's life, these roles demand extroversion. They demand you being outside of yourself. They demand you being infatuated and preoccupied by nonsense. And if any ruffle, if any reset comes that puts people back to even the shadow of normality, right, of being introverted or being alone or just having peace and quiet, that is not what our world wants. Those are no longer of a premium. They're no longer valued. And so everyone's looking at the political ramifications and all of this, and Bill Gates, and that's the Pied Piper lead. That's what they want you to lead. What they don't want you to do is examine your psyche. Well, I'm going to do it anyway. And it gives me a whole new set of facts, because even if this crisis was to pass, as you said, it's a historical thing. This has precedent. This happens all the time, right? And it will happen again and again, and then we have to ask that big question on the table: Are all these political harangues happening because man wants the anti-psychological age, has signed on for never looking at himself? Maybe we found a little key there, and there are, my audience, a few of them, they get this, and they are looking seriously at that question, and they're not getting caught up in the headlines. There's something, a matter that's far deeper than that needs to be addressed.
Reminds me of a quote from Carl Jung that speaks of the emotional complexes that are hidden in the unconscious mind, in the sense that when we don't allow for these darker aspects of our being to take a breath and be manifested under an authentic way of expressing them, they will manifest in other ways that are outside of our control and will possess us. And so again, just to contextualize this, because we repeat this same message in the message, the truth is within yourself, the solution is there. But again, we continue this frequency of looking into the projection and realizing, hey, we've been lied to. Again, I covered that issue, and this is not something that I am centering in my own personal information. I stand on your shoulders, Michael. I truly do, because what you said in your article in the Children of Thanatos, you spoke about the philosophical underpinning that is duping people. So let me be honest with you too, because I will like for you to receive my honesty and take it as friendship. So when I was a younger person, your article literally described me, because I went from philosophy to philosophy, phase to phase, and a perpetual pursuit to identify myself or validate myself. And these things just kept on going and frustrated me, and it just burned me out. So here we are today. We're talking about the global headlines and the Mad Piper. They actually want us to feel the destruction that we are embracing. Michael, what is the philosophical agenda here? What is the ultimate trajectory, if you can surmise it for the person who does not tune into these things?
Oh, well, it's impossible, really. A lot of what I'm doing right now is more advanced in my work. It's been a long time moving toward that. But again, as I say, there is a ruling elite, and they do get a kick out of seeing us squirm, right? And sometimes that's almost like an obsessive thing. It's like the pharaoh playing with the ants and so on. And so this meltdown, even if this meltdown happened for semi-legitimate reasons, it wasn't actually orchestrated, right? It is China's meltdown going mad, and then these things happen. I mean, that would be my particular take on it. It's not as orchestrated as they say, but what has happened is after that it occurred, collaterally, right, other forces got involved. The lie mechanism of the media would be included in this, and various political ramifications, right? There's so much to go into there, right? Mm-hmm. But it really wouldn't matter, because when it comes to mass hysteria, and this is a sort of just see, here's the weird thing, right? For anyone born in the 80s or 90s, whatever, they've never even experienced world wars or really any kind of conflict. When the coin doesn't go into the slot machine, that's about the only bad hair day that they've had. So or the parking spot wasn't at the mall or whatever. So they have no setbacks in that sense. So there's a whole different generation experiencing what our forefathers experienced on a daily basis: great world wars, great catastrophes, meltdowns, depressions, even great pandemics and epidemics. Go and look up the Spanish flu of the early 20th century and all of this, where countless millions died. There are even there's been even instances of flus and other diseases that shut down entire villages and towns, but other neighboring places weren't even that affected. So there's been an inflation, right, of panic over this issue. There's been instances where severe diseases came into the world, into Europe, and it affected only the region and everybody else basically stayed open and did what they did, and they handled it. So it's almost like a sort of groupthink situation. How many people can be controlled? How many will obey? How many will sit home? There's a lot of demographics. There's a lot of statistics being taken right now on the state of it. It's like a reading, a temperature reading. Now, there are other more archetypal, right, mythic reasons for this. And the only way to really explain that to a layman is as simple: if you don't do your homework, you'll not pass the class. So in existential terms, if people are unworked psychologically and spiritually, well, then there will be, on the material level, then you will find blowback because of that. And we know that people have not been doing a modicum of any kind of spiritual homework. There's been certain peers in the past, like 9/11, that had a big impact on, say, this alternative movement, right? And that gave people a certain shot in the arm for a while. And they were reading great books and going to great websites. But then this movement also got infiltrated as well by certain types. And also just as apathy came back, you just were flooded with boogaloo stuff, crazy wacko jacko conspiracy theories, then the rebuttal of those, and all of this argy-bargy, right? And the real secrets of this movement, which were actually quite remarkable and brilliant, both on a political and higher level, they're sort of obscured now. People, I got it. I read the soundbite. So real homework wasn't done, and it's an axiom, and people can set about proving this in whatever way they want. So as I said, if the person at the class has been, tardy and they've not been paying attention, they won't get the grade. And it's exactly the same thing in society. You're not going to get the spiritual, social, existential grade if you've just been partying and boozing and whoring and having fun. And that's just the bottom line. And so in our extremely decadent, highly culture is falling to a very, very low level. Education is a farce. It doesn't even deserve the term anymore. And all of the other pestilences, including a lot of subliminal programming from television and the media. And there's no defenses anymore. The call for sovereignty went unheard, right? Then you will find catastrophe like this. And this is endorsed in all of the astrology that one would look at to bring to bear on this. I know that sounds very strange to people, but the case can be easily proven. In fact, those who are skeptical about astrology should start getting into it right now, because the very proofs of certain colossal events, which haven't happened for many, many decades, are happening now. Ergo, a lot of the meltdown that's taking place. So there's a very, very it would be easier to prove, astrology right now, especially the position of Pluto, and certain other aspects and so on. So it's kind of fascinating to watch. But it's just that rap on the knuckles because people haven't been doing the homework. And now, hopefully, people can see, yes, there is a consequence for that. If I keep on eating crackers and, a Twinkie bar, I'm going to lose my health. I'm going to get very, very ill and sick. Well, it's exactly the same way on the spiritual level. More books have been written, brilliant stuff, proving that materialism is the greatest farce and lie that could ever be. Has anybody read them? There's more books written now showing the fallacies of religion in every complexion you can imagine. Is anybody reading it? There's books now that can talk about, the deepest realities. They're right out there right now. People would rather, look at the New York bestseller list and read some shoddy crap or watch some rubbish. So there is fallout for that, and it's like a kind of a sheep from the goat situation to a certain degree. There's no easier way to put it. And also then on the political level, we've had political systems that are long, long, long past their sell-by date. Communism, socialism, Bolshevism, all these anti-capitalistic sort of models, they're way, way past their sell-by date. So it's not surprising to me that this comes up, and that maybe we could be, if we're lucky, seeing the end of this paradigm, which is always its narrative was very basic, very threadbare, very 101. And it's just, people sign on for it, not because they have a sort of well-meaning liberalism or well-meaning humanitarianism, and that's all fine and dandy, but they don't realize what a terrible dragon, a serpent, in the garden that they're helping to bolster. And maybe now it's just it's not because of any particular human endeavor. It just could be that this time is over, just like any skateboard meme or musical, icon or musical sound, a disco, how it came and had its day and disappeared, So hey, I'm just hoping that we're seeing a exodus, and a bit of an awakening in the whole world, in regards to this extreme radical incendiary revolutionary movements that came up in the 1700s, and they've ruled the world for a long time. They've gained some very great minds who shouldn't have been bothered with it, but they have. But now maybe there is a zeitgeist change. Maybe right now it could be that. I'm always looking to that as well. And that would be a healthy thing. So a little bit of sacrifice, from Western people here, a little bit of a reset in that context. Oh, that changes everything. One should be more than willing to make those sacrifices if it means, the death of this Leviathan, which it will eat us in the dark. It might look at the surface, pleasantries or whatever. But while this pestilence is in the bloodstream, you're never well. And sometimes, this purging might be a kind of a return of immunity. And there are indications that this is happening, actually. So,
yeah, definitely. I'm glad that you brought the immunity because it ties into what I'm trying to bring into the conversation. I understand that in Unslaved podcast and in your work, where you're advancing a sophistication of nuanced thought that is not generally appreciated by the everyday layman. And see, my journey is to elevate my own personal consciousness and be a medium to those friends who don't want to participate in the class discussion, right? And so I find it more just fruitful to really be impactful and on a human level, because this happens in the realm of the human imagination. As you already know, Michael, I'm not telling you anything new. So one thing that reminds me and encapsulates it perfectly in a cultural icon sort of way is George Carlin's skit, where he talks about the constant obsession in people where they want to be clean of everything. Everything wants to be sanitized. And we look at the words used in this theater of fear. The sanitation of everything is a must. Criminal thought must be eliminated. I enjoyed a sentence that I think it was in the Children of Thanatos that you said, that normal human engagement must be outlawed, must be destroyed, because that is exactly the process that brings us together to each other. Michael, now this psychic immunity, we talk about the physical immunity, but how do we obtain psychic immunity?
Yeah, well, that means to revisit the dragon fight. That means to do what I call shadow work as an umbrella term. And now we're moving more into the Reichian, right, model. This would be, I use terms like, awakening the somatic intelligence and all. There's different ways of looking at this, but what it really means is that the superficiality, the listening to sound bites, all of that has to end, and a person must return to the concept of self. And when they do, they realize that the self has been, you find it bleeding. It's not just the wounded hero, like a Parsifal or the Fisher King. It's cut to shreds. It's like something, a 10 of swords card in the tarot deck that's yourself somewhere buried, you know what I mean? And so you have to go back and resuscitate yourself, which is very, very hard to do given the anti-psychological, anti-individualistic culture that we're in. It means reading Ayn Rand. It means discovering what heroism and masculinity and capitalism are. It means reading about the coming together of the West. Not that it was by any means perfect. In fact, it had a lot of flaws, but at least the history of it will teach you something about thought, and about freedom and all of these things. So it's quite a study, first off, and then there's a lot of psychological work. But the psychological work is not, in my opinion, just sitting around on lying on a couch in that sense. It's trying to get in touch with the body and the somatic intelligence, and then you'll find, and that becomes difficult, and then you'll find out why it's difficult. Right? And that just simple jogging and physical culture isn't enough. So then that takes you to another level in which you're starting to delve into the Reiches and the Lawans and the Yanovs and people like that. So that's going to awaken you. That's going to take you probably even into martial arts and related things like that. You turn the corner and you find a completely different relationship with the human body. What is it? And so without plugging that in, there can be no healing at all. So the healing that I'm talking about, is very somatic. And also it's a re-education. Because all these other voices around us, voices of adultism, voices of socialism, anti-capitalism, right? These are all put us into a hypnagogic state, very suggestible state, in which you're not thinking of self, you're thinking of the we, the us, and the our. The we, the us, and our. Those have become your mantras, and they're so invisible to you by proximity that you don't even notice it. So we're getting to a point where the sickest people, the most unconscious and the most ignorant people, have now lost even the compass to judge that they are ignorant. The gulf between wisdom and ignorance is now so utterly profound that we're on the very last days in which anything can even be done to save the human race, right? Because they don't even have the inner compass. It used to be before, you'd feel a spark of conscience. I need to know more. I'm not fulfilling my life. I feel empty. I feel depressed. The happy pills have taken that all away. And the approval of all the other pink hats in the crowd and the social thugocracy. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, the more you talk this way, the more you're approved of. And they go, oh, that's great. Okay, I found another. I found belonging. I have no thoughts that will trouble you. It's like that movie Network. All anxieties tranquilized. You've bought into a paradigm. And that paradigm is Marcusean, and it's been built up very, very slowly by some very, very clever people who knew that they get us into such catch-two situations that our response to every obstacle that arises would be feminized. It would not be hero, So they done it on a pan level. It's brilliant. They just took what we talked about earlier. They took the dynamics of the infancy conflict with the parents and writ it large and in sociological terms. It's an act of genius, actually. And, these people who don't know anything about this stupidly blame Freud and others. They have no idea what they're talking about. Oh my God, right? It was these extremely leftist people, deconstructionists, what we call the postmodernists, who rescripted the psychology of the child and adultism and applied it in a way that would infantilize the whole world. And so that's another reason why things may not change for the better. I talked about some things that might, but what might not change is the better is that masculinity and heroism as we know it in men and women is now almost non-existent. And the ones that do have it are such a small demographic, it's almost impossible to see how they would factor in. The masses of the world literally are a sludge culture, right? They haven't grown up on any of the great programs. They haven't grown up on any of the great music. That was something, that's dad rock. Yeah, don't like it. Listen to this, right? So their brains are just, like omelets. So you may not even have any of the enrichment or any character at all. This is how dangerous, so when people like me rail against, the Leviathans, people think you're crazy, right? Because they have no idea. They haven't gone down and looked under the lid to see the damage that's been done. So the healing obviously can happen, but it's such a personalistic thing. That's why I've never advertised, don't reach out. I've designed all my work for people to come to it when they're ready and take from it what they will, and all of that. And I stick by that, stick by that to the end. Because also you can't advertise it, because if I was to forcibly, and this has been all through my 21-year career in this movement, I've had the opportunity every single year to do this. I've even worked with other people that almost insisted that we do it, and I've not, because then you're violating that person's sovereignty. Now I'm becoming somewhat like the other dictator says, here, I'm telling you, right? So me going and ramming this stuff down people's throats, how the hell are you going to do that? And if I was able to even manage to do it, say I put enough money behind it, and we did have every kind of advertising on the net that you could have, isn't that erasing that person's sense of freedom? And then I'm now following into exactly the same trap as everything I'm telling them is pestilential? Well, see, I won't. It'll have to be, here I am. I've laid it out. I've done the best I can do. And I've walked over, cut glass all my life to put it in a format that is, from say a complete beginner or even a quite seasoned PhD type person. I've put my work together, excruciating work, to make sure that it's palatable to both. And I think I've succeeded in that. And that's it. That's all I can do. I'm not going to go and Anthony Robbins it any further. I've had the opportunity to do that, and it's distasteful. It's not part of my akashics to do that. And and I much prefer it this way. We're individuals who are much more in an authentic, respectful, and contemplative state come to it. People like yourself and others, that is far more pleasing to me, actually.
And in the cultural lexicon, we can observe the closest thing to the rebel or the wise man that tells us to dispel our fear of authority and stuff like that will be a comedian. But then, you take into these cultural elements in comedians, and they themselves are indoctrinated with the cultural condition in this matrix. And you talk about these self-help guides or gurus, or you hint into it. And the real reason behind why these stylized self-help gurus try to broadcast themselves is usually one of ego. And typically, from my experience in collaborating with people in the community, even the very intelligent people who do the research and the homework, they themselves falter, become neurotic and stuff like that, because it's just in us. There's this long trauma. Michael, we're going to kick it into high gear in this segment, because there's a question that I've been meaning to ask you. In this context of the corona crisis, things get totally obfuscated. And as you already know, the Epstein case, that's just one case of many. And very intelligent people have this myopic, or they have this folly in their mindset that they don't allow themselves to understand, hey, there's evil that exists. It's organized, highly sophisticated, and they do predate on people actively. And so, like, research would say, well, they can do all this global pedophilia and Satanism, but, they can't really believe it. Now, Michael, what prevents people from seeing true evil? Second question. What type of woman betrays her maternal instinct? It's relevant to the topic, by the way.
Well, pretty much every woman out there is doing it, because it's an education not to. And obviously, it's axiomatic that somebody in their teenage years starts breeding. It's going to go wrong. I'll put it in writing. You're too damn young. You'd have to be very, very advanced intellectually. You'd have to have studied child psychology. You would have had to study female psychology. Well, let me tell you one equation. The last thing that womankind world over is interested in is female psychology. Go figure. Religion? Shit, yeah, no problem. Sign on from that, right? Having your stint as a business magnate and CEO, they'll sign on for that. They'll jump through all the hoops of everything else. Dolling themselves up so they can pull a man, they'll sign on for that, right? Every single thing will be done to a perfection that is stunning, right? It's all efficacious. It's all pristine. It's all effortless, and all the rest of it when it comes to these episodic, timelines and the chronology. But interest in the actual child that you're, what is it other than just the biological, efficacy of it? But that's biology. That's just biology. You didn't create it. If you're born a woman, right, giving birth, that's just biology. There's nothing to do with psychology. I'm talking about psychology. Biology, a frog can spawn. Well, I give it a medal for that, right? We're locked into such fallacies in life, right? What do you know about yourself and why you even need to breed? What do you know about the child's psychology that you are breeding from the fetus point onwards? Absolutely nothing is what you know. And if you do, it's some white coat, some professional nothing that is talking to you, giving you all the lies. And I've written books going into that about the lies of it. Although another kind of science out there corroborates what I'm talking about. In pediatrics now, the actual neuroscience of it is actually corroborating, the stuff I talk about. So there isn't any rebuttal in any of these issues, you see. And there is adultism. And if you're a victim of it, what are you doing breeding children? If you haven't released yourself from the chains of slavery, from adultism, and from your own dragon fight with your mother or your father or your complex or whatever it may be, what the hell gives you the right to fill this world up with horribly episodic, horribly depressed people who maybe end up, their whole life is dominated by suicidal thoughts and, homicidal thoughts. And to escape that, they have to go and become, slaves of Big Brother. You think I'm going to smile on that and call you heroic because this is the road that you've taken? Absolutely not. That's for everybody else. They'll congratulate you. I'm not going to do so. Because I'm also looking at the roots of this tyranny I don't look at political tyranny. In fact, it almost has no bearing on anything that I do. I know it's there, and I've had commentary about it throughout my work, but I'm always looking at what it is existentially, right? What it is on a psychological level that brings that dynamic about. That's what's fascinating to me, and it's not fascinating to anybody else, right? Because and as you can see, most of the so-called speakers or what in this movement avoid it like the plague. They don't want to have these conversations that we're having. You know what I mean? And I know it irritates the hell out of them, but that's too bad. I've been doing that since I was 13, irritating people. So I'm not going to change now. Right? This is antinomian thought. This is truly transgressive thought. This tells you why there are boogaloo subcultures. Why in religion people will throw themselves under the feet of their gods and die. Why they go to war with an enemy. Why it's easy to be seduced into this is our enemy now. All of the different cognitive things. But to answer your question specifically, the reason why we don't see what the hell is going on because we have become expert at reality distortion, right? It's almost the same as having multiple personality disorder, right? When you meet somebody who can actually fracture their own minds, nobody did it to them. Other people may have created the soil for this dissociation, where the person does not want to be a self, as we spoke earlier. And then one of the mechanisms of not being a self is to have many selves. Sure, I'm 36 different voices. Right? I mean, it's 101 when you crack it, when you know why all of this happens. Or schizophrenia, which is an extreme retraction from the world. Psychosis is an extreme reaction to the world or against the world. Neurosis is sort of in between, or the curing can still happen. But psychosis, schizophrenia, multiple personality can never, ever, ever be solved. In many ways, then you might as well. I don't ever sign on for big pharma, but in those extreme cases, just to bring that person some respite. There are people out there, physicians who say you have to give them medication. Their lives are such turmoil, such pain. So there's a gray area there as well. I don't blame Big Pharma for everything. Sometimes those pills actually do bring a semblance of, sanity back to a totally disturbed soul. But what I'm against is that even non-psychotic people, somewhat so-called ordinary people, the average persona we talk, shouldn't be downing that just because they're, like George Carlin says, or your omelet fell on the floor, or, there's a little bit of an upset. I mean, come on, right? And that's what's happening. That's that pseudo happiness that everybody's craving. And in the desire for only pleasure, then you get this massive reality distortion. Enemies on one side, friends on the other. And so you're easily played. My mother was a great person. Don't break the fifth commandment. There's a little anecdote about that in the article. The fifth commandment being love, love and honor your parents. What, even when they're evil? Yes. And we've embodied that. Not, oh no, the Bible, if the Bible had said, honor your mother and father if these are goodly souls. And if they're not, do not. That would have been different. But they left that part out, and we never put the amendment in there that I am not meant to honor evil parents. Thank you very much. That one edict, we're looking for solutions. That's what I'm doing. I'm exploring in my work where the little doors and the port, the keyholes are, and maybe where there's a door left ajar where we can escape this nonsense. Right? And one of them is go ahead and break the fifth commandment. If your mother was a pernicious person who either sexually or emotionally, right, committed incest with you, how many people even know what that is, emotional incest, or when it's happening? Or in any other way, was basically an A or immoral person, an amoral or immoral person, and same for the father, of course. But the thing why I always do this is because the father's influence generally comes on a lot later. And so it's not that to exonerate the male in person's life, but their influence in terms of the psychic life of a child is infinitely later than the mother's is. And in fact, I don't know if I did it in the article, but I've done it in other work where, there's even a pre-Freudian sort of moment, right, in the first months and weeks after birth called the semiotic level. And it was talked about by a feminist. It was a couple of feminists that drew attention to this. We've talked about it on Slave. And that was like, okay, we're not, because of what they discovered. In fact, even they backed off because it changed everything. Actually, they found out things that cancel feminism. And in feminism, in the end, canceled these theorists. Because what they discovered was that the fetus, be it a boy or a girl, is completely and utterly dominated by the mother's self-conversation, personal energy, lifestyle, etc. Right? But even her self-conversation is overriding the identity and will of the child. And then what you see growing up after the second and third year is already a disfigured, mutilated personality type who is now going to be in a state of existential fallout for the rest of their lives. And then don't you see how that's going to affect the teenage sexuality, the vision of one's own self-schema at teenage periods, which is very catastrophic often, forcing the child to become either a layabout or a derelict or a hyper masculinized authoritarian type, as you talked about earlier, or a delinquent type, or and that's at that point where the leftist, rightist thing comes upon. It might only show up 13, 14, 15, 16 years later. But our orientations toward political systems is rooted in this. And I'm just being very brief, but there's stages and sub-stages. And actually, that's a very fascinating thing. You've read the articles, so you've seen. It's a very fascinating thing, those stages, starting with the semiotic, when there's a complete colonization of the child's mind. And therefore, the long-winded, we've gone a long way around here to answer the simple question. And that is that the educated mother does not blanket bomb or carpet bomb the psychology of her child. That's the education we're now specifically talking about. She knows it's happening, but draws a line, just mentally. That's all it is. It's just a mental, I'm leaving some room for the sovereignty of my child to be itself. Oh my God, now you're into a whole different realm. But unfortunately, that's not what we're finding. That woman is so empty in herself, needs that child as a crutch so badly to cushion her own agony of her own Oedipal period and her struggle against her mother. Right? And then later the fathers, because it all goes haywire after that, that she is now having children as a cushion to her own misery and her own depression, her own suffering. It's a chain of necessity, but it's a chain of total evil. And unless you break that chain, you can fidget about all you want in the political realm. I am not impressed. A little bit, it'd be good cop, bad cop. Oh, one minute we got something fantastic, but the next minute we're down in the dumps again. Is that what people want? That's what all you have been happening since before the Roman Empire. The 20th century alone. Nothing but ups and downs and ins and outs, and nothing ultimately changing. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Is that what people are going to, put up with? Or are they going to, well, they are putting up with it. The average persona is the man, oh, that's all right for me. Sure, I take the sugar with the salt, more work, less work, more play. And the government hearing you, this is what I've been saying from really day, the government hearing you, oh, okay, we've got it. Yep, thanks for telling us what to do. So here's more car chases, here's more love scenes, here's more bullshit, here's more malls, right? But now we find ourselves in a weird glitchy moment where a lot of those paradigms have sort of broken down. So it allows even people like myself to say, that's odd. Didn't expect that. Right. So let's start examining this. And you do it rationally and you think what it's all about. Maybe they think they've got everyone in the bag so much that even a glitch like this will not change the essential status quo. That's very disheartening. If they think they've got everybody so acculturated to their cage, like the lion walks up and down and knows exactly when the keeper's going to come and throw that hunk of meat in there and that'll be fast. And then I go to sleep. Then, we wait and then we get up. If they have everybody so acculturated, maybe they know that the slave himself, after the semblance of normality returns, he will in fact just go, where's my gray uniform? My God, what happened there? And cognitively, in this reality distortion we're talking about, go right back to square one with the added feeling of don't rock the boat, an extra dose, right? So I'm just speculating, but believe me, crazier things have happened. I'm hoping it's not that, of course. I'm hoping that and the astrology backs me up, that's saying, no, the radical change is coming. Falsity, the mask you spoke of, is coming down. It's the age of a revealing and the age of awakening. And I spoke about that a few years back, but now it's ramped up more, and I was expecting it. So there's been a lot of things happening that actually show it could be this. And, without mollycoddling people, I'll go, yeah, the false need to worry. You brought all of this on, both politically and existentially. The despicable way that you brought your children up, you're putting 3-year-olds on medication. You're believing all the lies. Oh, it's got a disorder here. We've got a big manual here. And your kid's in it. Just give me a few days and I'll find where all the 35 disorders and all the medication we need to inject into the child, I mean, for goodness sake. Nobody in this whole planet can come into my house and force me to eat only these kinds of foods, to put in my mouth. When I go to a restaurant, they can't force me to eat one thing on the menu and not anything else in my mouth, in my body. But now Bill Gates is telling you're going to line up and take an injection. Don't people say, no, you're not. You don't tell me what to put in my head, and you don't tell me what to put in my stomach, right? And you don't tell me if I'm on other drugs, what I'm going to take or not take. I decide in all these fields. So then, knowing that, these people know this. So why do they keep this threat up? Because it is a threat. Because it is a threat. Because we're so traumatized inside that any threat, Bill Gates' threat or Al Gore's mysterious freezing of the world, whatever he had, I don't even remember, right? Some nonsense, weather, right? It doesn't matter about the thing. The snapshot is not the thing. What's the thing is the threat, the fear behind it. They can't throw 3-headed monsters at you anymore. They can't throw devils like they did in the medieval period, right? Satan, the incubus and the succubus. Well, actually go to certain parts of the world and they're still quite happy to believe in all of that. But since they know the rational person is far beyond that, well, that doesn't stop us putting 3-headed monsters at the gates. So I'm looking at only that threat, what it is, what it isn't. And it's interesting to study the subliminals of, the fact that it's a virus and all of what that means, because it is a virus. It's a Wilhelm Reichian plague that you've got. But it's not the coronavirus. It's something infinitely more. That if I wave this mannequin in front of you, the puppet show, right, it will awaken the fact that you are poisoned. Now, this is something then, that needs exploration. But again, you couldn't do it to a non-psychological audience. They'd glaze over. According to Wilhelm Reich, we are deeply infirm. We are deeply the victims of an emotional plague. I'm not going to get into all the technical details, but he just said that the mind and the body are basically poisoned. And the Mitwelt is poisoned. The society is poisoned. So I see the song and dance that they're doing now as a kind of turning our head slightly toward that wound that we don't want to look at. But they do it in this extraordinary way of introducing an external version of the same thing that we have every day, garnered within ourselves. And that will unseat a lot of people, cause a lot of psychosis. It's not for healing purposes, I can tell you that. But in doing so, a healing purpose much higher than them, like what C.S. Lewis called the deeper magic, may actually occur, and I am keeping my focus on that. Well, if you didn't, you just run around like a headless chicken. So there are silver linings, and I always like in my work to focus on those as well.
Most definitely, that's what will encourage us, and it will give us an intuition into what is next. The model that they choose to bring us to our attention, from what I understand and what I was reading in your articles, it's so we can get frustrated and our convictions just wane and get weakened. And yes, the symbolic, the details, the overestimated statistics, those things go fly over the head. People don't actually do their personal homework to begin with. And yes, if you find yourself that you can't catch up to the conversation right now, then you need to pause, get away from this video and actually read the information, follow the sources. And Michael makes a wonderful work in sourcing his articles with the philosophical ideas. Now, Michael, I emailed you about why I wanted to bring you into this conversation, because it goes deeper, of course. But there is this adage by Hegel that talks about how the wisdom of owl only returns at dusk. What can you tell us that in the context of this crisis?
Oh, that means many things, right? But Hegel basically wrote things like that because he was always the three of them, right? They learned from a man called Johann Fichte. He was actually their real teacher. They sat in his class. They were really, really turned on by things he was saying. But they felt he was talking a little bit in abstract, convoluted terms, right? In fact, most of the world got the man wrong, But at least what they wanted to do as young men is move forward to extrapolate. They were on fire with the teachings of Fichte, is basically what it was. And so they were motivated, right, to write it, sort of like, when you write something, it's clear to you, it's clear to yourself. And the 3, 4, 5 of these guys, including Friedrich Hölderlin, the great poet, they all wanted to iterate, because this was a great Renaissance. There's been other Renaissances in the West, you see, that nobody wants to talk about. They just keep talking about the same old boring shit. But in Germany at this period of time, post-Kantian, there was an enormous Renaissance of thought that, I make the center of a lot of my work. It generally comes under the heading of idealism. But central to idealism is this incredible story. And that is, which should, as soon as I said, you'd wonder why it hasn't been central. And that is that they realized that man is not just conscious. We know we're conscious, right? And animals are also conscious. So, but what Hegel wanted to emphasize is that we're not just conscious. We are self-conscious. And self-consciousness is a very rare and unique thing in the planet. It makes man very different. He's aware. You can use other words like self-reflexive. We're aware that we're thinking. I'm aware of my awareness. All of this, right? It all pertains. They took it very seriously. They didn't think of it as some new age nonsense. The fact that you can think about your own thought, that you know that you're a thinking being, and you can stand behind that and observe it even, which is the awareness to do so, right? As well as being a thinking being in a more sort of transparent way every day, this fascinated them. And they said, why are we not studying that? So the whole host of them, right? They took their cue from Kant, but they thought that Kant hadn't really got his hands on this, right? He seems to do, but it seems to slip away. So they wanted to grab this one point and go, you're talking about these self-conscious beings and you're describing them perfectly. But you seem to be missing the fact that we are self-conscious, not just conscious. This is what makes us unique. This ability to know that we are knowers. And this was then the center of idealism, right? And in fact, because of the great chicanery of materialistic philosophers who came later, right, like the postmodernists, a little group before that, we don't know a lot of this because they did such a beautiful work of disfiguring idealism to make it look like idealism sits away from the world, and is such impractical nonsense. It's more akin to religion. No, it isn't. All these things that I'm talking about idealism flow perfectly into pragmatism, utilitarianism, even materialism, if you wanted to, right? Materialism, you can feed off of it, nourish itself. So the idealists are not abstract, world-denying people. What they discovered was that because of this self-consciousness, then anything that we say about consciousness is said by way of consciousness. Anything the mind comes to know about the mind is by way of the mind. Now, so what Hegel, one of the things that he meant by that extraordinary term is that it basically says if a cow is standing in a field in perfect blackness and the cow is black, you wouldn't see it. If an owl is flying in the night, which is a perfect animal for flying in the night, and it does it so silently, you would never know what an owl is if you were just conscious. So he says, if you were just consciousness, if you were just conscious, you'd have no sense of beauty. And as we said, you'd have no sense of the world around you in this wider, vivid way. And you would have no idea that you were a thinking being. Self-consciousness is what it's all about. Otherwise, I'm afraid you're just the sheep in the field, which is perfectly conscious being, but has no memory. Actually, they do have memory, but they have no future thought. There's no intentionality. I'm going to die. Woe is me. I'm going to sit here with my black armbands on and be depressed. Leave me alone. No animal does that, right? Because it's wrapped up in consciousness. The human being is wide open, right? He's blasted open. In fact, the true word ecstasy refers to this. In philosophy, the word ecstasy is used in a different context than we normally use it. And ecstasy, ex, means to be outside, like objective means to be outside. So then what they did was they said, because you're self-conscious, you have a polarity now between yourself and other, starting with yourself. There's a fragmentation of polarity inside. If there wasn't, then you would not be able to tell, right? As just consciousness is enabled to tell what's external to me, what appears to be external. When you become self-conscious, one of the distinctive next steps that we discover when we become self-conscious is that there's a self and there's a non-self. So that's the owl that flies in the night. You're able to discern it now. That's just one interpretation. You're able to see that cow in the field because the cow has separateness to you. The field has separateness to you. You have the light of consciousness, but light of consciousness is aware of darkness. Darkness is aware of light, right? When you build all of this up, over much more lengthy than we can do now, what actually happens is that they were collapsing dualism. They're starting with dualism, but what's really happening is you're getting to a third unifying principle that unifies dualism. That's where idealism is going. And by the way, it succeeded. Right? Not that you'd know by the headlines. That was the point. Because it was succeeding, all the papers went flying in the realm of their opponents. And so we had a campaign, a blitzkrieg of unimaginable depth and money spent. The finest intellects they could find were put on the job of making so much noise that this thing we're talking about would never be discovered. And there was even fallout. Some of the materialists finding out what was going on went, "Oh, I'm not going to be part of that." Well, that was also, cameras off when Ludwig Wittgenstein and others, and especially a man called Alfred North Whitehead, one of the most senior intellects behind materialism, behind the philosophy of materialism. He jumped ship and became a mystic. Well, you didn't hear about that because he suddenly discovered, he looked at the file and went, "Oh, this is what we're meant to be doing. I'm not signing on for that." And went back into hard, right, idealism of the German variety. But he went to Harvard. He was a great professor in Harvard. All these things I talk about in my work, people should know. But the main thing is they were heading for the nucleation of the hard dualism. But they did it very patiently and step by step, showing how man's consciousness and nature work together, how the cosmos factors in here, why we need gods and supernatural, all of it. All of these things were now reframed based on this essential Fichtean point that self-consciousness is what it's all about. Otherwise, you just fade to gray, you fade to that black, and you're not able, you're in the black, you're in the dark yourself. How could you tell there's a black cow in a black field? You're the black cow in the black field. There's no distinctiveness. There's no registration of an other. And if you have no other, well, then you have no empathy. So I said, we'd be cavemen. We'd be primitive. Hell, they'd even probably have more empathy than the modern man. But the Marcuses, knowing what we're talking about, they said, that's it. That's our mandate. We're going to take the principles of these great philosophers and we're going to disfigure them and move society toward that non-empathic, faceless, automaton, authoritarian. And we're going to use all the Freud we can find, bring it all to the table. That's what the Frankfurt School did. They were a big think tank. And they simply stole the teachings of other greater men, far greater men. But they were like, spiders on the web. And they had a huge group of them. And these are the most nihilistic people. They don't believe in anything. And they said that man doesn't believe in anything either. And taking the principle of the child, the infant was studied enormously, saying man as infant wants only pleasure and no pain. And they took this pathetic rubric, that most people on like a lot of scientists buy into this, unthinking types. Right? It's demonstrably false, right? People delay gratification all the time and suffer pain in order to get a pleasure, for goodness sake. But they didn't go that far. They just said man wants to have nothing but pleasure, give it to him. So one of the solutions, one of the things that's happening is very relevant today, what we're getting now, because a lot of people say, I'm not having any pleasure anymore. I'm locked up in my home. So this impacts exactly where we are. Why would they do that? Because, well, there's many reasons. One, if I take away a pleasure, you become even more addicted to it. There are times when you need to take away the pleasures for the infant, so it's banging its spoon, right? And then when the pleasure is restored, they're going, great, now I'm really welded to it. There's that to bear in mind, and again, there are silver linings. Maybe by the pulling away of the pleasures, we go cold turkey for a while, and we discover how victimized we were by the pleasure principle. And we waken up and get back to the reality print. That's what I'm hoping for. And we go, something, I want to go out and work. I don't just want to sit on the dole. I just don't want to, I'm a male, masculine women. I'm not just happy to sit around the houses poking about. I really do want to do something. And a lot of people may be feeling that actual apathy eating away at them. And they'll do anything just to go out and, move hay bales right now with their bare hands, something. Like I've even, humorously spoken about that in the sense of getting back to working with tools and things like that, as a way out of this mess. But what I was always meaning by that is that sometimes when the pleasure principle is taken away, it is also a pleasure. So these Marcusans didn't get it all right. There are moments. It's not, there's more than just pain and pleasure. There's grades in between, right? And so in a certain way, by having, it's like somebody who's had so much sweet in their, putting too many sugars for years in their coffee or their tea, actually stopped tasting the coffee and the tea. And if you did an experiment where you reduced the, bit by bit, they'd actually like it because they're actually tasting the actual flavor of these extraordinary drinks in our world, right? But with all the sugar piled in, you're getting the sugar highs and you're not actually savoring the real flavor. And it's the same thing in other modes of life. Sometimes when the pleasures are withdrawn, there's a little bit of a gray period. I think of them as very healthy anyway. Suddenly there's a moment where you really do savor, and you can, very few people will start to smell the roses again. Not everyone, but a very few. The rest will just have neurotic reaction after neurotic reaction. Give me it back. Come on, where's the pleasure? And the Marcusas, that's the main chain around our necks, is this pretty infantile idea that we only want pleasure, and we want to avoid pain. And they said, that's it. Let's give nothing but pleasure. And if you watch the 20th century, you watch, the movement of the 20th century, that's exactly what it is. And Freud saw it and shook with fear over it. That, my God, we are being given as a species, as an individuals in the race are being administered more and more pleasure than our forefathers ever knew. Different quality of pleasure, number one, but just more. I'm talking here purely quantitatively. And he worried that these types, he was an ultra-conservative, he worried that some of these oiks, in these, well, we just call them revolutionary movements for now, might pick up on this, because he was the author of a lot of it, and he knew who was, he knew the types he had around him, and sure enough, he was right. Turned out to be right. Herbert Marcuse was a very famous philosopher and sat in the classes of these greater intellects, and it ding, one day it just went on, went, oh my God, you give it to them, and they'll infantilize themselves, and that's what we've got. We don't have adults anymore. We certainly don't have masculine adults. We've got posers. People are making a good pretense of civilization and culture. We've already melted down. See, civilization like the Romans, it melts down with the bricks are literally falling on top of your head, right? No, there's other ways for civilizations to fall. Our civilization fell at the Second World War. The rest has just been, the thrashing about.
Right. In the material conditions of the Matrix, we are allowed to make the choices that give us pleasure, which turns us into our own enemy. I like to briefly surmise before we move on to our final segment, because, look, I totally understand what you're talking about, Michael. But again, we're directing this conversation to the public who hasn't even understand themselves to begin with. So we have to look at my personal journey, not yours. I'm saying my journey is I like to illustrate what is happening in the headlines and go beyond it because it touches people in their direct personal lives. So I asked my viewers, watchers, followers, friends, have you noticed that in the supermarket, people are acting less friendly? Well, they are acting less friendly because the mask is falling down. That is what Michael Tsarion is saying. This persona is underlying trauma, comes from ages ago. And the elite, whatever you want to call them, the death cult, they co-opt thought. There are people who have lived through these different phases of trauma and came to the same conclusion. Everything's interconnected. The solution's inside of you. And while these intellectuals are forgotten and totally misrepresented, the elite or the element of the establishment, they will put these clowns to our faces, and these fraudsters, scammers, they make us believe that they're the genius ones, that they are the gods of the marketplace, and that we do not, because of our condition, we're not smart enough to do that. But if you look at the system, it's so rigged. So look, there's where we are. There's just where we're finding ourselves. And this silver lining that Michael talks about is so important because this lockdown gives us a critical opportunity to reflect. And there will be a point where that won't happen. We're entering that model where prophylactic measures, this ritualization of hand washing and wearing a mask, those are some occult traditions that our ancestors faced. And so we are entering into this new model, the religion, the Corona world order, but the religion is just a superficial surface. So I want to remind you of that. Do the homework, follow the sources. Okay, so now, Michael, Look, I asked about the specifics of the women or the evil in women because from the example in the current case in Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell was the figurehead, was the one behind the whole scenario. It's easy for people to believe that men are evil and hurt children and sexually abuse people. It's easy to believe that, especially in this Me Too era because of all the programming and cultural condition. We know that. However, it's harder to prove people that women are evil and capable of evil, and these women, they are the ones who are pushing the system further and further through that angle. Michael, can you speak on that and tell us ultimately what is the silver lining? I know you've mentioned it a little bit, but I'd like for you to explain it to the viewers, please.
Yeah, the silver lining with that one will come in time, although we're past the starting point, luckily, gladly. And that is that the more incompetence that you have with people in highly professional positions, let's just put it that way, right? And this is the business world, the civic world, banking. Um, I'm thinking here of police forces, army, and fire service. All of that. When you have these substandard professionals, especially these leftists who are pushing this agenda to get women into all sorts of positions and feminize soy boys and all this kind of stuff. The silver lining is that very soon people will see that the unprofessionalism is right in their face. Things aren't getting done. There's not even a modicum of understanding how to get a thing done. And people will react. And people will then want to know why my letter's not arriving. Why, when I make 15 phone calls, nothing happens, right? When I make a serious complaint, I'm shuffling. Oh, this could be the police force when a crime has been committed. I want some Muslim, right, imbecile coming to help me deal with the neighbor's dog or the neighbor himself, or this pushover, this nothing, right? No, that's not how it's going to work, right? So the political correctness, and I'm being blasé here, but in many cases this will actually be true. There are alternatives, obviously. There are exceptions, obviously, but exceptions aren't going to keep civilization going. So on the whole, when people who should not be a million miles near those jobs is put in positions just because of some agenda or political correctness, the silver lining is they're going to be so goddamn incompetent, as the governors are, as the mayors are, right, letting prisoners out on the streets and all the rest of it, having no clue about some basic stuff. You will see it actually manifesting, and then it will be, there will be a reaction to it, because I don't think people will take it. So that's the good part, right? That they are actually their own actions will bring about their demise, because we're not going to let structures that were run very, very well, they were actually built, right, by a very different sort of person in the past, and were maintenanced and the infrastructure and all of that. We're not going to put that into the hands of a bunch of monkeys and blow-ins and people with shoddy thinking who can't understand and who don't go to that. It's like this: say you've hired somebody to work at McDonald's, or run your work in your kitchen at the restaurant. Do you really want your place to be closed because of disease? Because they're not washing their hands, they're not cleaning up properly. When they pretend to be mopping, but when you're looking, they just go sit back and smoke the cigarette. Or do you want professional, people who believe in their culture, believe in their society, love the fact that they've got this job, they like you and you like them, and they will go that extra distance to straighten and organize and clean, and that's what we should have had. That's what we should be having. Well, you're not getting it anymore across the board. No matter all the big Starbucks smiles and all the other stuff, you're not getting it. You're not getting that professionalism. You're not getting it from shop girls working in Boots and Macy's and all of these other places. And you're not getting it from guys who are, doing the so-called harder work, moving the dumpsters and all. You're getting nothing but unprofessional, right across the board, slovenly, sloppy behavior. It's so apparent. It's unbelievable. You almost shudder when you have to, even phone up somebody, at Earthlink or whatever it might be for help, right? Help? They don't even know the meaning of the word. You'd be lucky to get service, and then if you call, if in doing that, you try to call for a supervisor in the mad hope that you'll actually get some service. Now you'll be put on hold and you'll be back in the phone tree just out of spite. You see what I mean? So this is what I mean. The whole ideal of even getting proper service for your money, you're a taxpayer, you're whatever, is all gone out the window in this extreme anti-Western, anti-capitalistic meme, which is nothing but a drug. It's nothing but lunacy on steroids, because these people cannot provide another way. So those who've signed on for socialism, who work in the world in a state of spite, They're burning with hatred about even the job that they've got, and the rich man here and the rich man worked his ass off, you little punk, all right? And he's hiring you. But you've got a nanny state now that, has undermined that. So you're spilling your poison all over. And unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, but as I said, in the long run, the poor man who owns the business will go, I'm hiring no more of you people. There's your silver lining. And finally, it's like, yeah, mate, come on in. And it's like, yeah, I see. Okay, you're the one, right? You got a job. No more of this political correctness. So I'm looking for that zeitgeist change where these people get, a bit of their own medicine thrown in their faces. And when hiring is done, I don't care what the government says. I don't care what their edicts are. I don't care how much kickback I'm going to get because I've had a bunch of, blow-ins from the West and I get 25% cut or whatever it is. I don't care about that. We've been so much, this is the pleasure principle. Businessmen maybe outsourced. Businessmen have got subsidies from government for hiring a bunch of useless articles, right? Who the first moment they can slip on a pretend banana peel and sue your ass and ruin your business. Yeah, well, you hired it. All that outsourcing, by the way, people may not know this, but outsourcing is a farce as of now because more and more businesses that did outsource thinking they were going to save money are now being lawsuited by the nincompoops that they've hired in those countries that are saying, I ripped a nail, I got, I got a damage, I got an infection, I slipped and broke my, leg or spine or whatever. So what you thought you were saving by hiring all of these fucking, blow-ins is actually backfiring in your face because they get no love for you. They're not culturally the same as you. They don't speak the same language as you do. They have nothing in similar in religion or any other way. So you've had it. You've had it. You thought you would save money, but now the collapse comes because, and then how they're doing it, just to be a little bit more specific about it, is when one guy goes, yeah, I fell the rickety staircase, I fell over the banister and I've cracked everything, my clavicle, I can't work. 15 of his mates go, yeah, I saw it. So that's it. It's done. The judge just goes, yeah, right, you're on disability and you guys are fine. You have to pay him hundreds of thousands of compensation. I want all of this. Your rates of insurance go way up. So any money you thought you saved from your product by outsourcing it, for cheaper labor, it's all being back. Right now as we speak, this is becoming epidemic. I don't know if people realize this. But in the late 70s and 80s, there were whistleblowers on this very matter. I can point people right to the books. People like Sir James Goldsmith, I put the videos up on my blog on the unslaved.com site. There's a little blog there and I post things. Books have been written warning about this very thing. Did anybody listen? No, they call racist, capitalist, rich man. And their work went nowhere. They were dethroned by these Thatchers and all these other moronic people. And also it's the same formula. Anytime we look now, it is the same formula. It may look different. So coronavirus, yeah, it looks like a one-off thing that's really historical. And we've never seen this before. No. That's just a window dressing. They've dressed the puppet up differently, okay? They knew you get a bit tired of it, so they put a new costume on it. But the essential strategy to undermine Western morale, to feminize, right, to undermine our infrastructure by putting incompetence to go, well, is this a spanner? That's all been done regardless. Orchestrated by the CFR and a lot of other, the Round Table. I'm unpacking all of this in Unslaved, who the real agenda is, how long it's been going. In American context, it's been going since, say, Wilson and Roosevelt. That's where it really ramped up because they were able to get their talons in. And this is the group that your Epsteins are very, very outer members of. So when an Epstein nonsense comes up, or even a George Soros, these are very low-level operatives, and sometimes they're sacrificed, or sometimes they go too far. They're not the real evil ones. They're just the sort of lower-level deputies and lieutenants. But what's behind them, right, has sought to bring America low since before Wilson, but they got in at Wilson. They really got in because they found the right stooges, and they had already a few agents, like the Dulles brothers and Colonel Mandel House. They had a few of their agents already in the test of waters. Winston Churchill was very much part of all of this, and then it's been the last couple of 100 years, But as I say, it's mostly since Woodrow Wilson that they really, really mobilized. And so again, behind the scenes of the new, headlines is the same agenda. And sometimes it'll be a little hard to track because you think you're going up cul-de-sacs, and that's perfectly okay. Come back, find the footprints again of the predator and keep going. And you'll find then that, and if you've been doing that homework diligently, then even the things that are happening today, they're not really that difficult to understand. So it's just the agenda as usual. But sometimes there's collateral stuff going on as well. They need to move money around. They need to pull up the ladder a bit. Some of the great mentors in this movement, like John Coleman, always predicted that the middle class is an affront to this higher elite. right? They need the working class to to operate their machinery, but the middle class is this decadent bourgeoisie that they can really do without. The creative, masculine, but they're getting a little bit too rich for their boots because they can buy books and read. They're the threat. The working man is always working. The middle class starts to look over the fence. We don't want you looking over the fence. We don't want you asking questions. So over time, the middle class has been slowly assaulted until it shrinks. And so you'll have just extreme wealth. And it's not the wealth of rich men, by the way. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about wealth that has been dynastic wealth, extremely powerful secret societies. The middle class is the greatest creations, like I said, about being self-conscious. They're the most self-conscious. They're the real essence of a culture and a civilization. So that has been under attack through the Marcusans and the pre-Marcusans for decades. And so some of the economic, like I said, once you know this kind of thing, then all of these things that are happening right now make perfect sense. It's just another attack on the middle class to threaten that their fridges will be empty and you might be reduced back to the worker. We did make you a lieutenant colonel for a while. How do you like it when you're back to being a private? Well, I go ahead. Put me back right there because you're not going to change my mentality. You have no offense. You can't do anything to change my attitude. I'll go right back to square one and love it because I'm who I am. I'm not a fool. I'm a sage. And I'm self-made. You can't, no matter what, I could go back sweeping the streets. You see nothing but a smile on my face. Because I've got the inner riches. I don't need the material trappings, so they can't hurt me by any of that. Life could take that away by a meteor. Life could take that with your car smashed up against a pole and you're a paraplegic. Then you lost everything. Life is a million ways of resetting you and putting you back, as everyone listening to us now knows that. Right? A death of a family member, a loved one. You can be put back real easy. Right? So I don't need government to do it. Their version of it to scare me. I'm not scared by no puppet shows. I've grown up. My mind is, clear. You can out-philosophize them any fucking day.
And I think people need to understand that they have to do the warrior mentality, body and mind and spirit reset and break through those guidelines. I don't need to add anything more, Michael. I think you've been very vocal and effective in delivering this message. I often feel saturated in repeating the same thing. Look internally, find yourself, go outside of the mainstream and actually go and challenge yourself, impose limitations. But generally, it's not even about that. It's about if you have the eyes to see, you will see the truth before you. The truth does not need anyone to cheerlead it. People will see it when they open their heart. Michael, where is the best way to find your work if I am an uninitiated into your personal journey?
Well, a lot of work went into creating more modules. The days when I had one website and try to pack it all in there, long gone. That was in the beginning stages, and also had a lot of difficulty, getting a website and organizing it, and a lot of setbacks with people helping me. But then finally it slowly started. And then in the early days, I started to modulate the sites. I mean, almost from day one, because I realized that, look, I may have some Christian people and they don't want to plow over a lot of tarot and all, it's okay, meet them halfway. So I created a little site over there just for them, where they don't have to be molested with other things. Then I've got people who want to know about the psychology without having to deal with all of the conspiracy. Okay, let's modulate there. Then you want people with, what is my real conspiratorial framework or, message? Let's hone in on that. So now I've got 14, 15. I even sometimes had more. Had a lot of YouTube channels. A lot of them were taken down. So I think right now there's about 14 different sites, but you get to them all by michaeltsarion.com or msar.com for short. And you'll see they're all modulated and separate. So you can just hone in, like astrotheology, Dragon Mother, Irish origins. And these are constantly updated. I've never gone by even a week or so without something added, even if it's just a link, or even a full page. Recently, there's been a lot of major updates. You saw those articles there. That's one. And Dragon Mother was massively updated with a whole slew of different articles. That's not because of any lockdown. These were all in the works anyway, so that site would be more substantial. So I try to take them up to a certain level of substance so that people get a really good insight just by spending time on that site. And then they don't have to worry about other things I'm doing necessarily. When they want to, they can go there and see, oh, he's got something here on symbolism or Atlantis, right? And whatever. But I realize that my ideas are so vast, right? I'm so eclectic. I've always been like that. Never honed into just one thing, that I better do it this way. So there's a central site, michaeltsarion.com, and that gets you to all the other sites. All the articles are on michaeltsarion.com as well. Even the ones that are on other sites, I still link them there. So if you There's articles on Dragon Mother and something like, say, Irish Origins, but they'll still be linked to michaeltsarion.com, the article section. All the articles are there, so you don't even necessarily need to, bother navigating all these other sites. But I've made it as simple as possible. I've made it as straightforward and also aesthetically pleasant, because I can't stand websites that are very ugly and just cheap looking and all that. It ruins it. And also, they're too busy. My sites are quiet. They're dark. They're like a little oasis for people. And things are written in a very logical, simple style. I'm not an expert in anything, and I'm not academically lettered or whatever. But I have deep insight into the matters that I write about. And again, it is definitely a situation which people, when they're ready, can delve into it and take away things. But a great deal of energy and through the years has gone into it, more like over the long haul as opposed to just flash in the pan. I've really put a lot of decades, 21 years, as a matter of fact, in heart, just a complete non-stop work, into it.
And we truly appreciate your effort. I truly do, because I'm telling you, I saw your work early 2000s, and your illustration of the method that goes beyond the headlines, beyond the patterns and the symbols. It goes way, way beyond. And so that's why I wanted to bring you on. Again, I'm harping onto this because I know that you have so many sites, and I wanted to make sure I got the right one. But that's the feeling I got, that you modulated your work to better help people, because you know how you start. I'm not going to take too much of your time with this last thought. You know how you start with talking with people. It's like you have to state the obvious. No, I'm not racist. No, I don't believe that you should enslave yourself, and all these other things that you have to preface. It becomes so convoluted and tedious. So in this conversation, I hope if the viewer is ready and inspired to see your work, please visit michaeltsarion.com, and for yourself, whatever you are interested in, follow your heart and intuition. Once again, Michael Tsarion, thank you so much for your time. I hope you can join me for a couple of minutes. I want to ask you some personal questions.
You bet.
All right.
Thank you so much, Hector.
You're welcome. Okay, now, gotta stop this recording here. Just a second, sir.